This is Jeb Boone with ESFI, and I'm here with John TotalBiscuit Bain. How's it going, man?
It's not too bad at all. Yep, the usual pre-event shenanigans, sound checks, production, all sorts of stuff like that. Wondering whether the event's going to be ready. It's always exciting to see that.
Okay, going into the event, other than your player and on Axiom, Crank, who do you think you're looking forward to the most watching?
Well, I want to see how Polk can do in this event. There's quite a lot of hype for him going into this. He, of course, has had exceptional performances in the past. I find him a very entertaining player to watch. He's got great positional play. He's also got very crisp mechanics, which is fairly important if you want to beat Zerg these days, it seems. So we'll seeing what's coming out of him, but I think I'm possibly most excited to see Bomber, because Bomber he's a classic player. I remember watching him and indeed casting him in some of the much older Dream hacks in winter 2010, summer 2011, and he was an exciting player to watch. He was absolutely fantastic Terran, and he fell off the map a little bit lately, but he had an exceptional performance at MLG Dallas. So I'm thinking with a week's worth of practice behind him, no jet lag whatsoever, he should be fairly formidable and very entertaining to watch.
Axiom just picked up Ryung, which is another former Slayers player. You have a unique insight into what happened with that organization. Well, you don't have to go into any of the specifics. Does knowing what happened with Slayers make you cynical or optimistic about the future of StarCraft 2 as an esport?
I don't really think that the demise of Slayers really does too much damage to StarCraft 2. Honestly, I think it could have happened to really any team whatsoever. And as we pointed out in our statement, we very much believe that the responsibility for the failure of any organization starts at the top, not at the bottom. So I feel that any team could have gone that way. And honestly, there are other teams forming all of the time. There are new sponsors being attracted to the scene all of the time. And I think certainly after MLG Dallas, there's been a big surge of optimism surrounding the scene, which has taken a few hits in the last few months. There's just been this general feeling of negativity surrounding a variety of aspects. Blizzard has really stepped up. Obviously, they were planning this for months. They don't just conjure things out of their, well, you know, and they have been working on creating some really good features for the beta. The new beta patches worked very well indeed. It's got people really, really excited for the future of Heart of the Swarm, and we just had some exhibition matches as well in Korea, and the Koreans seem to be really digging Heart of the Swarm as well. So I think, honestly, while it is definitely sad that Slayers went the way that it did, I don't think it's indicative of any real damage or underlying problem with the scene. I just feel that it was a big organization that perhaps tried to do a little bit too much and had a variety of problems.
Do you think that Heart of the Swarm has the potential to be a next Brood War? Do you think it can garner the same sort of following it had in Korea?
Everything has the potential to be the next Brood War. The question is whether or not it will. I mean, Blizzard has hit that quite nicely when it comes to Brood War, but then you look at their other expansions, say Frozen Throne, and honestly, like the Warcraft 3 scene did pretty well considering where it was and what kind of game that it was, and the fact that it was very different to StarCraft originally. It had a fantastic surge in China, but it never really got huge competitively in the West. I think that Heart of the Swarm at this point is probably going to have a greater impact than it otherwise would have if we hadn't had about 5 months of the same patch and the same metagame and perceived Zerg dominance. I think we can safely say now it's beyond perception. It's the fact that Zerg do seem to have an edge at the moment, and that's just the way the metagame has been for the longest time. As to why it is, that requires far more knowledge than I have, but I think the Heart of the Swarm has the potential to really shake things up. But I think that what they have to do is ensure that they, I suppose, have the balls to take some risks with the units and think about, okay, these units might be overpowered, but that's okay as long as they really shake the game up and things start to get exciting again. I think the real risk is if the expansion and the units are underwhelming because they're too scared of the possibility of unbalancing the game, and then it doesn't have the impact that Brood War had, which was groundbreaking at the time.
You mentioned China with Warcraft 3 and the huge following that it had there. Do you think that Chinese immigration policies and how strict they are, as well as the U.S.'s, makes it harder for players to move back and forth? Or I know you've had your own experiences with that as well.
A lot of immigration policies do, honestly, and even with the Blizzard World Championships, there are issues with getting casters over to the finals in China. Wolf apparently was having some issues with the visa because he's an American citizen working in Korea, and apparently that makes things very difficult. I know Apollo had to go back to the UK, spend quite a lot of money to get his visa sorted out in order to travel over there in the first place. Immigration policies never help, and I'm just waiting for the time when we do get a bunch of players pushed away from the US borders because someone decides, you know what, we don't want to let you in for this
Do
particular
you think
MLG.
that's inevitable? Or?
I think it's going to happen eventually. Having seen what happens with that and having players travel in very much on visa waivers or visas that are not actually designed for the idea of essentially doing a job in mind. It's a really weird grey area because if you compete in a competition, then there are certain rules, of course, that cover your prize money, but immigration law also has certain ideas about whether or not you should be actually earning money or doing a job or working as an independent contractor in the United States. And I have a feeling that the vast majority of players coming over are not utilizing those visas, and I certainly don't blame them for that because the visa process is expensive and it's extremely convoluted. So yeah, it's only a matter of time, I think. It's sad when it will happen eventually, and I'm dreading the day when it does.
Now that Axiom has started up and you guys are starting to grow, have you? It's bad. There hasn't been much time that you've had to think about this, obviously. But are you thinking of expanding in the future to LoL or Dota 2?
No, I don't think so. League of Legends it's obviously had a surge of popularity. It's a very expensive game to actually hold a team for because you do need at least 5 people plus maybe a bencher. So it's difficult to keep the facilities, keep the housing, especially if we happen to be focused on Korea. Housing in Korea is extremely expensive, so housing a LoL team is very difficult. And I think even if we did expand in one direction, it wouldn't be a MOBA game. I'd be more interested in pushing something like, say, Counter-Strike Go. I think it's got potential, possibly, and everyone in their mother has a LoL team now anyway, so it's not like it's original.
Yeah. Well, what's your opinion of Riot's method of doing esports? People call it throwing money, but creating their own sort of separate season league with their own corporate infrastructure. Do you think that's good or bad for the scene?
Well, I don't necessarily see it being bad for the scene per se. I feel that the risk is that you build your castle upon sand, in that the scene has accelerated and grown so quickly as a result of the amount of money that Riot has put into it. And we've seen many esports bubbles before burst and do a lot of damage overall. Even if it's just one game that goes out in a blaze, it takes other games with it. It does damage to the overall scene. I think that supporting it with an official season league is fine, absolutely fine, but they've only just started doing that. Prior to this, what they've been doing is throwing a lot of money at it because it essentially is a marketing expense for them. They make it back in skins, they make it back in players that come in and buy champions and things like that. Blizzard doesn't really have the ability to do that, which makes the scene very different for us, and Blizzard's involvement in it has been far more limited, a little too limited, in my opinion. We're getting to the point where they're putting on these really good events, and the World Championship Series will no doubt be absolutely fantastic. But I think for the most part it's okay, but I'm always very wary of a big bull made of money that comes into my China shop and says, hey, how you doing? That's some really nice things you have there. It would be a shame if something would have happened to them.
Gotcha. Do you have any fun plans for a YouTube channel in the future, or are you going to keep doing what you've been doing in the past?
If it ain't broke, don't fix it, I suppose.
Sure.
But, it's just a case of expanding upon the concept that the channel was built on, the idea of bringing new games to people that they may not necessarily seen before, personality-driven, very honest commentary, and how can you actually do that and go off on a tangent without venturing too far apart. As regards to the StarCraft stuff, I expect the same thing to happen. Maybe a few interesting things with Axiom, some scrims, maybe a few custom games and things like that.
Just a bit of a fun diversion. What do you think your most memorable esport moment has been so far?
That's a really difficult one, but I think actually the one that stuck in my mind was very recent. MLG Dallas, Rain versus Sheth. The game 2 was actually phenomenal. I screamed my lungs out. I almost blew my voice out at that point because it was such an exciting comeback and such a quick one. So that definitely sticks in my mind. There's been so many great moments. It's really hard to nail one down, but that one definitely recently.
Yeah, sure, that was incredible. Yeah. Well, thanks very much for the interview. Feel free to take any time to say a few words.
I'd just like to, of course, thank everyone that continues to support my channel over at youtube.com/cynicalbrit and the StarCraft 2 commentary at youtube.com/TotalBiscuit. Big thanks to my wife, who is, of course, the team owner of Axiom, does the vast majority of the legwork for the team, and is doing a great job so far of creating a very sustainable esports model for our organization. And, of course, a big thanks to everyone that continues to turn out to events and say hi and be generally awesome people.
Great. Thanks so much.
No problem.